Hi there everyone. So I want to do things a little bit differently in this video. I have prepared something. I have written a letter that I'm going to read. I have entitled this letter An Open Letter to Academia. I am unsubscribing from the cult of academia. I have been embedded in education systems for the vast majority of my life. As a student, I clocked a total of 14 years of public schooling, pre-K through 12, 4 years of undergraduate schooling, 4 years of graduate schooling for 2 master's degrees, and 3 years of doctorate schooling. I had finished most but not all of my coursework. Beyond that, my mother taught at the local university for essentially all of my upbringing, and I began adjunct teaching for that same university 2 years after graduating with my MSW and PA. This eventually moved into a full-time faculty position that I held for 4 years. During those 4 years, my life changed. Eventually, those changes inspired me to walk out of academia, to walk out of my professional career path, and to walk out of the life that had been the only thing I had ever known. In this letter, I have attempted to encapsulate some of the primary driving forces behind that decision, which is quite a tall order, and one I hope I have given the appropriate nuance. I want to state a few disclaimers and some of my intentions up front. I first want to clearly say and acknowledge that not all educational experiences are alike. I'm not coming to these conclusions without bias. I speak from my own personal lived experiences, which are limited by the bubble I grew up within, went to school within, and continue to teach within today as adjunct. My experiences have exclusively been within the human-focused fields, specifically social work and sociology, and I write mostly with social work education in mind. I genuinely and sincerely hope the messages I share within this letter do not match your experiences within academia, but I know they match enough of our experiences that I need to speak out. I also want to clarify that I am calling out a system, a way of being. This is bigger than any individual educator, bigger than any individual program or department, bigger than any individual school or university system, any state or region of the country. The roots of the oppression that exists within academia run as deep as the roots of oppression that exist within this country. My fellow educators, I certainly write this for you. For us, I know I'm not alone in my experiences, my frustrations, my concerns, my outrage, my passion, my love for our students. I invite us into this conversation together as it is new and evolving and largely, in my experience anyways, unexplored. I want us to get curious together, to get curious about what else can be done. My beloved students, I write this for you as well. If you have ever been made to feel stupid, less than, incapable, or as though you weren't taking your future or the future of the world seriously enough, I especially write this for you. If you have ever been pushed to the point of wanting to give up on school, on yourself, on your life, I especially write this for you. Please hear that you are not alone. Please hear that the blame lies not on you, but on a society that sets so many of us up to fail. Regardless of your own personal educational experiences, dear students, I want us to get curious too. I didn't expect teaching to teach me about trauma, about oppression, about being human, but it did. Teaching opened me to the humanity within my students and thus myself. First, to the awareness that I was embodying the value system of the oppressor, which was a rapid and rough realization I was confronted with my very first semester. Then to insights, understandings, and experiences that allowed me to begin seeing beyond the way I had been taught, socialized, and honestly brainwashed to see the world. I began to see that we have a choice in all of this. I began to see that we create it or we uncreate it together. I began to see that I had power. In my 4 years as a full-time faculty member, I encountered a shocking number of students struggling with their mental health. Most, if not all, of the undergraduate students who passed through my doors, and a good chunk of the grad students as well, were struggling with some aspect of their mental health, often directly related to academic pressures. I had conversations with far too many students who felt inadequate. Far too many students who believed that they were alone in their struggles because it wasn't appropriate to talk about or professional to admit. Far too many students who internalized the blame, who believed that they were unworthy, incapable, stupid. I encountered too many students grappling with how to meet their most basic human needs: food, housing, family, all while shouldering immense pressure placed upon them by their classes and programs of study. Too many students who had direct experiences of discrimination in academia due to their race, sexuality, gender identity, nationality, English language skills, appearance, and so on. I encountered far too many students who were struggling to the point of suicidality. I saw this again and again, every single year I taught. I began to see how the pressure I was placing upon them was perpetuating this. I began to see how I was a part of the problem. I noticed that some of my students seemed to be trying their hardest in getting C's or failing out, while others were skating by and getting A's. I noticed how this was heavily patterned by race and to a somewhat lesser degree class. I remembered how easy it had been for me myself to achieve in school, coming from a middle-class white family who valued formal education and a high school in a wealthy district that prepared me with essentially college-level content before I even got to college. I began to ask myself, what kind of a system is set up like this? So, here's the deal. The impacts of academia are not what we've been taught that they are, not entirely. The purpose of schooling itself is not what we've been taught that it is. Is education important, valuable, necessary in this human journey we are all upon? Yes, of course it is. But only part of what we are doing in formal education is in fact education. The other part is socialization. Not just what students know, but how they think, how they speak, how they write, how they dress, how they act. In essence, our education systems, perhaps especially higher education, are designed to produce civilized populations. Formal education is largely the mechanism used to teach us what it means to be a civil person. Now, this notion of civilized, where did it come from? Why, yes, the dawn of this country, when European invaders arrived and began committing mass genocide against indigenous populations who had been residing here previously for thousands of years. Have you heard that quote, "Kill the Indian, save the man"? It's attributed to the founder of one of the first Indian boarding schools in this country, an Army officer who used his experience with Native American prisoners of war in the design process. Kill the Indian, meaning kill the culture, kill the difference. Save the man, meaning instill within them instead the value system of the white Europeans. Not just what they knew, but how they thought, how they spoke, how they wrote, how they dressed, how they act. What was appropriate and what was not appropriate. You see, the process of civilization teaches us that there are certain ways to be human and that those ways are good, bringing more value, deserving of more respect. So naturally, it also teaches that there are incorrect ways to be human, uncivilized people who don't talk the right way, don't look the right way, don't dress the right way, don't engage in social cues in the right way. Those people need to be changed. Is this sounding familiar? Education has been painted as an antidote to oppression, a way to level the playing field and support upwards mobility for historically marginalized, oppressed, and brutalized populations. Indigenous peoples, Black and brown folks, immigrants, refugees, families stuck in cycles of generational poverty. While there are individual circumstances and anecdotes that we can point to as evidence of this mindset, I ask you, is this not an offshoot of the same mentality white settler colonizers held when they inflicted the white man's education upon tens of thousands of indigenous people as a part of the land theft of what we've come to call the United States of America? Who designed the playing field that we're aiming for? Whose world are we preparing them and ourselves for? Are we not still trying to kill the savage and save the man? With activists like Michelle Alexander, we are slowly coming to realize that our criminal justice system is a modern-day extension of slavery and subsequent Jim Crow legislative efforts. I have come to believe, and I feel called to make this assertion, that in some fundamental ways, traditional academia is a modern-day extension of Indian boarding schools. By and large, we continue this pattern of compiling groups of diverse humans with diverse arrays of life experiences, belief systems, values, spiritual callings, and individual expressions down a conveyor belt, pulling out the pieces we don't like and filling in the gaps with the white man's value system. This process is, of course, nowhere near as extreme as what indigenous populations suffered for decades, which involved torture, abuse, and sometimes death. That doesn't mean it is acceptable or without harm today. So too does our criminal justice system of today appear humane when compared to the extremity of chattel slavery of our history. Our spirits are still being oppressed. This is especially true for those with identities that are marginalized in this country, but it is also true for all of us. We are taught to believe the white man's science, disbelieve our own inner wisdom systems, and hide or leave behind the parts of ourselves that don't fit into the colonized systems academia is preparing us for. We take most of our learning from textbooks written largely by white men, yes, even in social work, and we negate the value of stories, lived experiences, and systems of belief that fall beyond the lines of white patriarchal supremacy culture. Our identities and our sense of self get tied up into our academic achievement. It becomes more than just about a piece of paper at the end of the road. It becomes about worth, about value, about human potential. I call for a turning of the tide. When I say I am unsubscribing from academia, I'm really unsubscribing from some very specific aspects of academia. I am unsubscribing from ideals of professionalism. I am unsubscribing from the false belief that the clothes someone is wearing, the style in which they are communicating, or the manner in which they are presenting themselves has an impact upon the value of their message. If someone else's delivery is detracting from their message, it is most likely because I am struggling with an aspect of subconscious bias, and I am responsible for resolving that within myself. I am unsubscribing from subconscious paradigms that have taught me that certain people are good, trustworthy, knowledgeable because they talk a certain way, dress a certain way, present themselves in a certain way. Because I ask you, where do those values come from? When we say dress professionally, what do we mean? Whose dress are we mimicking? When we say communicate professionally, whose dialect are we seeking to appease? When we understand what they mean and yet penalize students for improper grammar, spelling, citation styles, or other Eurocentric writing norms, I ask you, whose standards are we demanding that they meet? We claim we are preparing students for the real professional world, and yet we create the real professional world. Already it is shifting. The presence of tattoos, piercings, different clothing styles, hairstyles, displays of gender, language norms, and more are not what they were 10 years ago. I ask us to consider, what would happen if we focused on the content of what our students have to say instead of the package they deliver it within? What would be so bad about the encouragement of self-expression? What are we afraid of? I am unsubscribing from the roles of grammar police, APA enforcer, sentence restructurer, citation double checker, etc. Instead, I am seeking depth. How are my students feeling about this content? Are my students integrating this content? Relatedly, I am unsubscribing from worldviews, mentalities, and teachings that push academic science, the scientific process, as a more valid form of science than others. My educational experiences, specifically higher level statistics courses I took as part of my doctoral curriculum, along with my own personal lived experiences, have taught me this directly. There are deep flaws within academic science that we do not often enough acknowledge, and there are larger truths about the natural world that cannot be explained, classified, or measured by Western understandings of science alone. I am unsubscribing from the belief that if it cannot be measured, it does not exist. That is naively Cartesianistic and categorically incorrect. I am unsubscribing from power and control dynamics built into the hierarchy of academia. I do not want students to trust me or listen to me because I am listed as the instructor of a course, which is only because I've had and continue to have access to the resources and privileges to fill that space. I am unsubscribing from any system that teaches me or others to turn over our power to someone else or to diminish our own internal guidance systems at the behest of an expert. Instead, I call in the role of facilitator, creating a learning container, bringing in a diverse and impactful array of content, treating all in attendance as equal participants along the learning journey, which I too am an equal learner within. I am unsubscribing and calling out messages, belief systems, and practices that present education as more important than any other aspect of a student's life. Higher education is one way to invest in one's future, but it is not the only way, nor is it even the most important way. Pushing out messages that it is damaging to students and honestly, gaslighting and culty. There should be no attachment to shame in the academic experience. Failing a class should never feel the same as failing as a person. When educators approach students with the expectation that school is one of the most important things in their lives, when we perpetuate the honestly false narrative that education is what they need in order to have the life that they want, we are setting them up to internalize any perceived failures along the way. Certain educational requirements are necessary for certain types of jobs. This is true. Formal education is also not the only way of accessing opportunities to creating a life of meaning, joy, and ease where our basic needs are also met. In fact, formal education does not necessarily guarantee any of those things. I am unsubscribing from a belief that the way we do things now is the way things should be done. I call out widespread use of lecture-style classrooms and approaches that situate students as passive learners, as outdated, ineffective, and quite frankly, unimaginative. I call out social work's largely unpaid practicum requirement as unjust, along with any other programs that require their students to participate in unpaid internships. I call out an overemphasis on academic writing, reading, and assessment as unjust. I want to be clear, I have participated in all of these processes, and also I see now these requirements and expectations disproportionately have negative impacts on our most marginalized students. Our BIPOC students, our ESL students, single parents, those who lacked access to quality education growing up, those who grew up in poor areas, those living in poverty now, those who carry the weight of facing oppression and discrimination on a daily basis. When we say that's just the way it is, we should also be waving a huge red flag. I am calling for some deep self-reflection from anyone watching this who has ever responded to student overwhelm with the sentiment of, well, I did it, or we all had to do it, so you can too. Just as teaching our clients how to navigate broken systems in society without addressing broader systemic issues ultimately reinforces those broken systems that we've got, so too do uncritiqued processes and practices within education ultimately perpetuate the oppression we say we're fighting against. All of this may seem well-intentioned. We want our students to have the tools they need to build meaningful, sustainable lives. Of course, we want individual people to be able to navigate and survive the society of today, not some hypothetical utopian society of the future where things like appearance and language skills don't matter. Yet without equal and balanced action to change broken systems, we end up only strengthening those broken systems through our passive participation. We make them more deeply entrenched. We become another cog in the wheel of said system. We, in essence, enable systems of oppression by taking responsibility from the system to change and placing it upon the individual. Sure, it's hard, maybe unjust, but all these other people jumped through these hoops and made it to the end, so you can too. The end justifies the means, but the end does not justify the means. Because the end is not just a client that received assistance or a student that received a diploma. The true end is a society that continues to demand individual clients navigate increasingly large, complex, broken systems for survival. The true end is a society that continues to teach students in a way that centralizes white European values that are rooted in settler colonization, patriarchy, and white supremacy. The true end is continuation of the capitalized, colonized, patriarchal, white supremacist, heteronormative, ableist, and I could go on, society that we see that is not working for the vast, vast, vast majority, if not in some way all of us. What we should really be saying to our clients, our students, and one another is, these systems are built to keep people oppressed. Here are some of the ways that happens broadly. Here are some of the ways that has and continues to happen specifically for you. Figuring out how to meet our needs for survival is a priority, yes. And also, what can we do with the knowledge that the system is responsible? Seeking policy change is only one option for this, and one that limits us to the master's tools in our efforts to dismantle the master's house. I encourage us to be more creative than that. I know we can be more creative than that. Our students have ideas. Our students know what is not working. Our students deserve to be heard on this. We don't need to know the answers, and I don't claim to have them, but I do believe that we can find them together. I want to end with being really, really clear. I believe in education, which I am defining as a process of facilitating learning. I love education. I know education can change our world because it's changed me, and I see it change my students all the time. But education is not synonymous with academia. Education can happen inside of a classroom, sure. For me, my most powerful educational experiences have happened outside of a classroom. Education is not one size fits all. It does not come from tests or standardized assessments. It is not found in the pages of traditional textbooks written by individuals who, by and large, haven't actually personally experienced or lived through the problems that they write about. Education happens when we share stories together, when we share our values and where they came from, our life experiences and what they've taught us. Our own personal lived experiences are our most impactful educators. Real life facilitates learning that shapes us, changes us, touches us deeper than most pages in a book or lectures in a class ever could. The cult of academia promotes paradigms, value systems, and power dynamics that I stand against because I believe they are counter to education. Again, I do not claim to be the expert. I do not claim to have all of the answers to all of the concerns and assertions that I have made here. What I can say is that I know in my heart, in my soul, that there is a better way. I believe we can find it. I am unsubscribing from the cult of academia, which includes and extends beyond the walls of higher education. These value systems permeate society and are present in one way or another for all of us. I am unsubscribing, and if you feel so called, I invite you to join me.